On a quiet morning in April 2018, an 82-year-old man was arrested at his modest home in Sacramento, California. His neighbors were shocked. For decades, Joseph James DeAngelo had been the friendly face on the block, a former police officer, a devoted father, a grandfather who loved his family. But DNA evidence had just revealed something impossible. This mild-mannered retiree was the Golden State Killer, one of the most prolific serial predators in American history. For 49 years, he had hidden in plain sight. This is the story of how cutting-edge genealogy technology finally unmasked a monster who had terrorized California for over a decade, committing at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and more than 120 burglaries. This is the story of the Golden State Killer. Between 1974 and 1986, California lived in fear. A faceless criminal moved through communities like a ghost, breaking into homes in the dead of night, terrorizing families, and vanishing without a trace. Law enforcement knew they were hunting the same man because of his distinctive patterns, his meticulous planning, and evidence left behind. But despite thousands of hours of investigation, despite dozens of detectives working the case, despite hundreds of suspects being questioned, he simply disappeared in 1986. The case went cold. The victims and their families were left without answers, until 32 years later, when science finally caught up with him. Before we dive deeper into this investigation, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. New investigations every week. The terror began in June 1976 in the suburban neighborhoods of Sacramento County. A man wearing a ski mask broke into homes in the middle of the night. His method was calculated and deeply disturbing. He would shine a flashlight into the faces of sleeping couples, waking them with the barrel of a gun pressed against their heads. He would bind the male victim tightly, sometimes placing dishes on his back with a chilling warning, "If I hear those dishes fall, I'll kill her." Then he would assault the female victim, often for hours, sometimes ransacking the home for valuables before disappearing into the darkness. What made this predator especially terrifying was his level of preparation. Evidence suggested he had surveilled his victims beforehand. He knew the layouts of their homes. He often cut phone lines before entering. In some cases, he had loosened window latches days earlier. Investigators realized they weren't dealing with an opportunistic criminal. This was someone who planned meticulously, who studied his targets, who enjoyed the control and the fear he created. The attacks escalated. Between 1976 and 1978, he struck more than 50 times across Sacramento, Contra Costa, and Stockton. The media called him the East Area Rapist. Communities were paralyzed with fear. Women were afraid to sleep in their own beds. Men felt helpless, unable to protect their families. Neighborhood watch groups formed, gun sales skyrocketed, but still, he evaded capture. Detective Richard Shelby, who worked the early cases, later recalled the frustration of chasing a phantom. Despite collecting evidence, despite the attacker's numerous appearances, nobody could identify him. Witnesses described him as a white male, between 5'9" and 5'10", athletic build, sometimes wearing a ski mask, other times a dark jacket. His voice was distinctive. Some victims reported he would sob or speak to himself during attacks, muttering phrases like, "I hate you, Bonnie," leading investigators to wonder if a woman named Bonnie had somehow triggered his violence. Then, in October 1979, the violence took an even darker turn. The attacks moved south to Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, and this time, he began to kill. On December 30th, 1979, Dr. Robert Offerman and his partner Alexandria Manning were found shot to death in their home in Goleta. The crime scene bore similarities to the East Area Rapist attacks, evidence of surveillance, bindings, and the same meticulous planning. But now he had crossed the line into murder. Investigators began to suspect they were dealing with the same offender, but the jurisdictional boundaries between Northern and Southern California made coordination difficult. The killer struck again. On March 13, 1980, Charlene and Lyman Smith were bludgeoned to death in their Ventura home. Again, the method matched: late-night entry, careful planning, extreme violence. By now, Southern California investigators had dubbed him the original Night Stalker, unaware he was the same man who had terrorized Sacramento. Over the next 6 years, he would kill at least 10 more people. Patrice and Keith Harrington in August 1980, Manuela Withoon in February 1981, Cherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez in July 1981. Each attack bore his signature: methodical preparation, binding of victims, extreme brutality. And then, after attacking 18-year-old Janelle Cruz in May 1986, he vanished completely. For decades, the cases remained unsolved. Detectives retired, evidence sat in storage, and the Golden State Killer, a name later given to connect all his crimes, became a legendary cold case. Some investigators suspected he had died or been incarcerated for another crime. Others believed he had simply stopped, perhaps satisfied with the terror he had created, or afraid advancing technology would catch him. But the families never forgot. They formed support groups, maintained websites, pushed for continued investigation, and one woman in particular refused to let the case die. Michelle McNamara was a true crime writer obsessed with the Golden State Killer case. She spent years researching, organizing evidence, connecting details across jurisdictions, and building a comprehensive timeline. Her work culminated in the 2018 book I'll Be Gone in the Dark, published 2 years after her sudden death in 2016. The book reignited public interest in the case and put pressure on law enforcement to use new technologies to solve it. That new technology was investigative genetic genealogy, a method that had recently been used to solve other cold cases. The technique involved uploading crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch, which allowed investigators to find distant relatives of unknown suspects. By building family trees and narrowing down possibilities, they could identify potential suspects. In 2017, the FBI formed a task force with local law enforcement agencies and a team of specialized investigators. They took DNA evidence collected from multiple crime scenes, evidence that had been carefully preserved for decades, and created a genetic profile. Then they uploaded it to GEDmatch. The database returned hits: distant cousins, third and fourth degree relatives. Genealogist Barbara Ray Venter began the painstaking work of constructing family trees, tracing lineages back through generations, identifying common ancestors, and narrowing down branches. After weeks of intensive research, the tree pointed to one family. And within that family, one name stood out: Joseph James DeAngelo. Born on November 8, 1945, DeAngelo had a background that should have made him the last person suspected. He had served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War. After returning, he attended Sierra College and studied criminal justice. In 1973, he joined the Exeter Police Department in Tulare County. In 1976, right when the East Area rapist attacks began, he became a police officer with the Auburn Police Department in Placer County, one of the jurisdictions being terrorized. This was the devastating irony. While communities looked to police for protection, the predator was wearing a badge. His law enforcement training explained his skill at evading capture. He knew investigative techniques. He understood evidence collection. He could monitor police radio frequencies to avoid patrols. And his position gave him access to information about neighborhoods, residents, and security measures. But DeAngelo's police career didn't last. In 1979, he was caught shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent from a store, tools commonly used in burglaries. He was fired from the Auburn Police Department. Interestingly, the East Area rapist attacks in Sacramento ended shortly after, and the violence shifted south to become the original Night Stalker murders. Some investigators now believe his termination and the shame it brought triggered escalation into homicide. After being fired, DeAngelo took a job as a mechanic at a distribution center, a position he held until his retirement in 2017. He married Sharon Huddle, a lawyer, in 1973, and they had 3 daughters. By all outward appearances, he lived an unremarkable life. Neighbors described him as quiet, sometimes grumpy, occasionally volatile when angered, but generally just another suburban retiree. In April 2018, investigators had their suspect. But they needed definitive proof, a direct DNA sample to confirm the genetic genealogy match. Undercover officers followed DeAngelo, waiting for an opportunity. On April 19th, they got it. DeAngelo discarded tissue at his home, leaving it in a trash can outside. Officers collected the tissue and submitted it for DNA analysis. The results came back days later. A match. The DNA from the tissue matched the DNA from multiple Golden State Killer crime scenes with a statistical certainty of 1 in billions. On April 24, 2018, at 1:30 in the afternoon, A massive law enforcement team converged on DeAngelo's Citrus Heights home. Officers surrounded the property, prepared for confrontation. When they approached, they found a frail 72-year-old man standing in his doorway. He offered no resistance. He simply stared at them as they announced the arrest. "Joseph James DeAngelo, you're under arrest for murder." The news sent shockwaves through California and across the nation. The Golden State Killer had finally been caught. But what shocked people most wasn't just that he'd evaded capture for so long. It was that he had been hiding in such plain sight. This wasn't a drifter or a recluse. This was a former cop, a husband, a father, a grandfather. Someone who had sat at family dinners, attended school events, lived a seemingly normal life while carrying the secrets of his horrific crimes. As investigators interviewed neighbors and family, a darker picture emerged. DeAngelo had a violent temper. He had been heard screaming profanities, once roaring so loudly that neighbors could hear him from inside their homes. He was obsessive about his lawn, once confronting a neighbor aggressively over a dispute about property lines. He occasionally made inappropriate comments about women, but nothing that would have indicated he was capable of such extreme violence. His wife Sharon filed for divorce during the investigation, and court documents revealed a troubled marriage. She described incidents of his anger, but even she had no idea about his crimes. His daughters were reportedly devastated, struggling to reconcile the father they knew with the monster he had been. The legal proceedings that followed were complex. DeAngelo was charged with 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping for robbery. Due to statutes of limitations, he could not be charged with the 50-plus sexual assaults, though prosecutors made clear they would present that evidence to show the pattern of his crimes. For 2 years, the case moved through the courts. DeAngelo's attorneys explored various defense strategies, including attempts to suppress evidence and claims about his mental state. But the DNA evidence was insurmountable. Genetic genealogy had been validated in other cases, and the direct DNA match from his discarded tissue left no room for doubt. In June 2020, facing the overwhelming evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, Joseph James DeAngelo entered a plea agreement. In exchange for a guilty plea to all charges, he would receive life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, avoiding execution. The court proceedings that followed were extraordinary. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, the sentencing hearing was held at Sacramento State University's ballroom to allow for social distancing. Over 4 days in August 2020, survivors and family members of victims gave impact statements. The testimonies were heartbreaking and powerful. One survivor, Jane Carson Sandler, who had been attacked in 1976, addressed DeAngelo directly. She described the decades of fear, the hypervigilance, the inability to feel safe in her own home. She said, "I've waited 44 years for this moment. The answer to why is still elusive, but the answer to who is right here. You deserve to rot in a cell for what you've done." Chris Pedretti, another survivor, spoke about the lifelong trauma. She described how the attack affected her marriage, her mental health, her ability to trust. She said, "I was your 65th victim, but I'm a survivor. I've lived with this for 44 years, and now you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars." Family members of the murder victims spoke about loved ones stolen from them. Bright futures cut short, decades of memories never made, the permanent hole left in their families. Gay Hardwick, whose father and stepmother were murdered in 1980, said, "You destroyed so much, but you didn't destroy us. We're still here." Throughout the 4 days of testimony, Joseph James DeAngelo sat in a wheelchair, often appearing to cry or show emotion, but he never spoke. He never apologized. He never explained why he had committed these horrific acts. On August 21, 2020, Superior Court Judge Michael Bowman sentenced DeAngelo to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 8 additional consecutive life terms. The judge stated, "The scope of Joseph DeAngelo's crimes is simply staggering. Each time he escaped into the night, his victims were left psychologically devastated." DeAngelo was immediately transferred to the California State Prison System, where he remains today in protective custody. At 79 years old, he will spend the remainder of his life behind bars, the face of the Golden State Killer finally known, the predator who terrorized California for over a decade finally held accountable. But questions remain. Why did he stop in 1986? Was it fear of advancing DNA technology? Had he satisfied whatever dark compulsion drove him? Was there a triggering event, perhaps connected to his family or his job? And the question that haunts many, how did he live with himself? How did he sit at the dinner table with his wife and children, attend graduations and weddings, present himself as a normal member of society, all while carrying the memories of such extreme violence? Psychologists who have studied the case suggest DeAngelo likely compartmentalized his crimes, separating his identity as a predator from his identity as a father and husband. Some experts believe his rage was triggered by specific stressors, his job loss, perceived slights, relationship issues, and that the attacks were a way of exerting power and control when he felt powerless in other areas of his life. The Golden State Killer case fundamentally changed criminal investigation. It was the first major case solved using investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that has since been used to solve dozens of cold cases across the country. It sparked important debates about privacy, the use of consumer DNA databases, and the balance between solving crimes and protecting genetic information. The case also highlighted the importance of evidence preservation and the dedication of cold case investigators who never stopped working, even when decades had passed. It vindicated the victims and survivors who had long insisted their cases were connected, who had maintained websites and support groups, who had refused to let the world forget. Michelle McNamara's work, though she didn't live to see the arrest, played a crucial role in keeping the case in the public consciousness. Her book's title, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, came from a chilling message the killer had allegedly whispered to one of his victims. But he was wrong. He wasn't gone. The darkness couldn't hide him forever. Today, advocacy groups continue to push for better resources for cold case investigations, improved communication between law enforcement jurisdictions, and support services for survivors of violent crime. The Golden State Killer case demonstrated that no matter how much time passes, justice can still be served. For 49 years, Joseph James DeAngelo successfully lived a double life, devoted family man by day, one of America's most prolific criminals by night. But DNA technology, the persistence of investigators, and the courage of survivors and victims' families finally brought his secrets into the light. If this investigation fascinated you, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth cases. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts. What do you think drove Joseph James DeAngelo to commit these crimes? And how do you feel about the use of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases? Let me know below. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people, real lives, and real mysteries that deserve to be remembered. The victims of the Golden State Killer will never be forgotten.